Hi everyone, good afternoon. Welcome to the eighth edition of Coffee with Ashish. Today we've got a very special guest, Amit Taneja from creative.com with us. And before we get into the conversation with him, I just wanted to run past in terms of what all we have been covering on this edition. We have talked about over the last few sessions, the entire evolution of the travel ecosystem from manual pre-technology era to the now AI-enabled, fast-paced, tech-powered B2C and B2B products available in the market. And if for a minute, we look at the B2C evolution, you might remember that, in some sessions we talked about how before B2C it was a great dependency on the manual ticket generation by a travel agent and how the entire experience for a retail or even a corporate traveler was so difficult. And, around 2005 and 2006 is when, a lot of B2C websites started coming in, which really made it a do it yourself experience for the end customer. But you might recollect that even then, it was not that easy because that was the era when the websites were or the products were built in a fashion of sort of a masala UI. You might remember Yahoo.com, Sifi.com, Rediff, GeoCities, in which you had lots of menus, lots of flashing JavaScript enabled pop-ups, and you would sometimes get confused with all these options. And in fact, as always, I also have a small cartoon to remind you of those times. You know, this might have happened to some of you that, and you're asking somebody to book a ticket and they say that, instead of booking a ticket to Mumbai, I clicked on something and booked the ticket to Goa and a jackpot voucher. These kind of things were not unusual in those times. And that's when the whole concept of UI UX also starting evolving in. And UI, if I talked about, it's somebody aptly defined that user interface is like a joke. If you have to explain it, it's not that good. And if you talk about the concept of UI and B2C in travel, I think people used to go to Make My Trip in that time for best deals. They used to go to Yatra for a wide variety of options in hotels, but they almost always used to go to ClearTip, including myself, for a clean, no nonsense user interface. And it's been a well-established case study if you read about it, that how ClearTrip completely changed the model and really been one of the front runners of how Indian internet ecosystem and travel trade ecosystem started looking at a much more minimalistic design and an enhanced user-based experience. So I think in that ways, ClearTrip has been a clear winner in terms of how it changed the game per se. And what that was the beginning. Over the years, if you talk about ClearTrip, they're now headquartered in Dubai, UAE. But over last 12 to 14 years, they have acquired series of companies. They've acquired Flyin, which was Saudi Arabia's leading online travel agent. And it has also been the one which has been the pioneer in evolving mobile app-based experience in all the B2C companies. Now ClearTrip, occupies a leading position in the market along with the other two competitors, and it does over 10 million flight tickets and 1.5 million hotel room nights. Absolutely excluding the last few months, which has been a disaster for everyone. But that's the kind of volumes they do. And in terms of technology, also they were one of the pioneers when in 2016 they launched a ClearTrip Local, which then everybody started following in. And but they were the first one who would aggregate globally to provide online discovery and booking of over 15,000 in-destination leisure activities for a traveler. And they also won the Best Travel Portal of the Year at the World Travel Brand Award 2015 and Best Mobile App at Web in Travel's WIT Innovation Awards 2016. And if you talk about our esteemed guest today in the session, Amit Taneja, he's been, essentially involved with the group, with ClearTrip.com almost since its beginning, close to 2009 and 2010, when ClearTrip started making some shape and form, is when Amit has been leading different verticals within ClearTrip, and it's actually been a pivotal part in its entire growth journey. And talking about his experience and background, he's got over 2 decades of international leadership experience in various travel and hospitality companies. He's a passionate change maker. He's an inspiring personality if you read about him. And in many ways, he has been a witness to how the entire internet ecosystem in India has evolved, and he has been instrumental in taking the organization global as well. So with that, a very warm welcome to you, Amit, to our show. And now I'm going to hand it over to Ashish, who's going to have conversation with you while I sit back and enjoy my coffee.
Uh, Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Karthik.
you, Karthik, and welcome, Amit. But Amit, having said that, and to my listeners here, um, I have to tell you that I consider you as a pioneer in the hotel aggregation space. Going back right to 2005 and my own experience with you when you set up Dacia, which was country's first aggregator for hotel. And I know the challenges you went dealing with the hotels to be able to put them into a common platform. Obviously, you would have created a great product for Travelocity to have acquired that product. And from Travelocity, I think if I've got the sequence right, Travel Guru and Ashwin Demera's team, and on to Yatra, etc. So if that's the sequence correct, Amit?
Yeah, it's effectively from Travel Guru to Travelocity and then the
So,
Yatra.
okay, so I got the sequence. So the mute point being that to me, nobody understands the hotel distribution better than you, being a pioneer. So having said that, in the first part, I'm going to go straight on to the domestic hotel aggregation in India.
Sure.
And the fact that we talk about, in each of the panel discussions that domestic tourism will go, domestic will start first. So I want to get down to domestic. And I'm not going to get down to a typical question of, oh, how do you see domestic hotel distribution next 2 years, etc., which of course is underlining. But I'm going to address the issue that distributing hotels is a big challenge in this country. Why is it a big challenge in the country? The air seats are hosted by the GDS. The GDS spend billions and billions of US dollar to make sure that the inventory, the search, and the booking experience to the B2B or B2C platform is evolved by the OTAs or the online travel company or from their desktop application. But if you look at the hotel scene in India, you forget about the chain, you've got random hotels, homestays spread across the country. Here, somebody has to spend a lot of money on their own, which is an OTA in this case, to get them hosted on a platform. And not only hosted on a platform, make sure that they stay on the platform because, you have to keep calling them manually. I know what it means, a call center you had set up yourself, but they had to be called, oh, we have booked a guest, make sure he gets a room because the hotels weren't used to dealing with it. The mute point being now with the mobility coming in, little does the public realize that an online distributor spends a lot of money in making sure those contents are available of hotel for somebody to get that experience. And all the hotel does to me is make the inventory, the price available. So therefore, the question here, and the second point is that the same distributor, if he's in the B2C space, has to make sure he spends a lot of money acquiring the customer. So he spends a lot of money acquiring the customer. He makes sure he spends a lot of money by hosting the hotel, and hotel just makes simply the product available. The point I'm here making, and very specifically for my hotel industry colleagues, that you guys need to do more than that. If you want the whole industry to evolve, whether you're a big or you're small, your marketing departments have been shelved, your cost of distribution has come down. It's not good enough to say, I'll give you a good deal hosted on the platform. I think somewhere that API, you've got to play something in putting that experience of a hotel consumer, not only on the room basis, but be it the facilities of the hotel, be it the check-in experience, all should be available on an OTA platform so that the concept of data coming at one point and you're pre-checked in right through, you can book your not only your hotel, but your restaurant, your dining, etc., should be made available on an OTA platform. And it's not for the OTA to spend dollars and dollars and money's worth to make that available. What do you say, Amit? And how do you see the future of this going forward?
So I think you touched on one thing which I would probably like to highlight people is that the distribution for the air and hotel is two diametrically different, right? And one of the reasons is that, if you look at the distribution at two sides of the coin, right? I mean, one side of the equation is effectively aggregation of supply, and the other is obviously the aggregation of demand, which is on the consumer side. On the air side, the advantage and why there's been an aggregation of supply side had been easier, whether it's through the platforms like GDSs or the likes of the Navitairs and which have been consolidating the low cost inventory, has been there are very, very few players. I mean, globally, if you kind of look at that, there are about at least 500, at the most 600, operators which operate commercial flights, right? That number keeps fluctuating. Whereas when you kind of look at hotel, I mean, look at in the country of the size of Nepal, which only have about 6,000 odd hotel, there are potentially about 5,500 operators for that. And now, if you take it to the scale of globally, then we're talking about roughly about close to, if not hundreds of million, at least about 80, 90, high double-digit million operators in that. And these are in a very, very varied degree of sophistication. You have on the one end of the spectrum, you have fairly evolved, technologically investing a lot in technology, like the chain, like the Marriotts and the Hiltons of the world, to versus the mom and pop operators who run the hotel business as a passion, because it's some they've been doing through generations, some because they've taken it as a retirement option. Somebody had a piece of land and they thought this is probably the best utilization of the asset. So obviously it's a very, very, not only the supply is fragmented, but it's also in terms of the operators, the way their incentive of being in that business, and their the objective they're looking out of the business are very, very different. So obviously that makes it a whole lot complex. And on top of that, because there has been also no single entity which has been willing to put money into that, right? In terms of whether it's been the hotels themselves. So, for example, if you look at it in the GDSs, right, airlines pay GDSs to use that platform. Whereas, even those, the consolidators, no hotels will pay consolidator, because obviously there has been the sense has been the X amount of commission that they offer has been will onset. So one is obviously is a big complexity. Now this complexity gets even more compounded when you have, you look at the alternate accommodation, which has been a trend in the last 5 or 6 years, and now the lines between the hotels, which were traditionally been, if you look at 10 years back, the accommodation providers were typically hotels. There will be some cases, there'll be like, okay, the debate will be as a star rated hotel versus a non-star rated hotel. And, in some cases it'll be guest houses, right? But the purpose is only accommodation. Now, in the last 10 years, with the blurring the lines of these accommodations, there are a lot of alternate accommodation providers which has come in, which basically means a lot of people who have their second homes have converted them into the options for people to come and use that, getting some sort of returns out from that property, which is better than giving it for a slightly long-term leases. Then also you've seen a trend where people have been welcoming people to in their homes while they have been in living as well, which used to be a fairly niche if you kind of look at 10 to 12 years back. And this trend is going to accelerate further, because if you look at a lot of these big cities, there's been a tussle between these homestays and the hotels, but I think now we are settling into the phase where the alternate accommodation can be a very important feature, and can be which the governments can use very, very effectively to make sure that there is a lot of extra burden that a city has because of the rampant construction which are going on, and that can become a good balancer, right, in terms of where you don't really need to build an oversupply, because one or two events are like happening, and suddenly post that event, what will happen to all those rooms that you will set up in there. So I think that eventually the balance which has been getting is coming in there, and that's been the trend, right? If you look at it about 7 years back, no OTA would sell a alternate accommodation, and Airbnb was the only platform. But now when you look at that, Booking.com claims to have more listing on the alternate accommodation than the Airbnb. And when we kind of look at in our part of the world, whether it's Make My Trip, Us, Yatra, all of us are showing the alternate accommodation into our platform. So we're still all of us learning in terms of how to best marry that as an accommodation with the hotel. So yeah, this problem is not getting any easier. This problem is going to get more and more complex. And we have also sort of seen in the last, in 5 or 6 years, where we have seen coming out from India, we've seen those hotel aggregators. OTAs have been an aggregator, as well as the sort of, the distributor of that product, i.e. the demand aggregator themselves. But we've also seen the evolution of the, what I call is the OYO models, right? Whether it's the OYOs, the Tribos and the Fab hotels which have come in. And if you look at it in terms of, their objective of coming in was like, can they look at one segment of that accommodation, try and bring about a certain standardization from my experience point of it, and also provide a single pipe of distribution into that. Now, obviously, there are a lot of question marks, and different people have different views about the business model and the viabilities of that. But I think that's also an evolution which is sort of taking. But I think one thing which is becoming very, very clear is that most of these are now building in more into towards providing the more experiences rather than trying to worrying about the trying to bring about sort of more an aggregation onto that. And the reason for this is because hotels accommodation essentially is an experiential product, right? I mean, there have been attempts to make this into more of a commodity product, which today, to a large extent, air has been a commodity product. 30, 40 years back, air was not a commodity product. It was an experience, right? Because and people were willing to pay top dollars to fly. Now, air now is a transportation. It's not an experience. It's just a commodity. It's a mean for getting from point A to point B. Obviously, there are certain segments to that which is experiential there, but the majority of that is the commodity. Whereas I think the hotel are very, very far away from that. The reason for this is, I think we all are different individuals. We have our different needs. There are different reasons why we travel. There are different objectives of traveling, and we have different tastes when it comes to. And hotels are very, very integral part of making sure that we seek in terms of where we see in terms of what that matches with in terms of our likings, right? And this is like, the home of someone is a reflection of your personality, and that's what sort of, we look into terms of when we travel, and whether we are traveling for work, whether we are traveling for leisure with family, or whether we're traveling for leisure alone. So I think that's why if you look at these aggregator models like the OYOs and the Fab and the Tribos are now moving more into the experiential category and sort of trying and say that, okay, we are going to provide you a very, very standardized, very, very sort of, predictable experience rather than sort of the pitch have been onto that. So I think that problem is a very, very complex problem. I don't see that as a solution which is going to be easy. But I think now we have technologies which are getting and that's obviously whether we in terms of look at the evolution of the clouds which is sort of coming in, which basically means you don't need the likes of the those of you who've been from the travel, they'll remember fare filing from the airlines onto the GDS, which today is a fairly large, intensive process, and these guys use a lot of sort of massive data centers in there. Now with sort of the emerging technologies, that's becoming easier, and I think there be some disruption in that in terms of bringing about how do we sort of effectively there is a standard sort of a platform where every hotel can sort of come in and put in their pipe, and that pipe can be used by multiple players, demand generators to sort of to sort of go and further distribute. I think that model will definitely evolve, but I think it's very hard to say whether it's going to be over the next couple of years, or there's going to be a slightly long term there. And also, if you kind of look at that, I mean, the large OTAs have also sort of becoming like a de facto in there. Today, both Bookings and Expedia are not only the globally largest producers of direct B2C consumer demand, but they're also sort of one of the largest aggregators, right? And if you kind of look at their respective distribution businesses that they have today are about, like for example, bookings distribution today is about 7x of the largest consolidators like the GTAs and the other consolidators that we have in there. So yeah, I mean there's been a movement, and we sort of look at that in our part of the world also. Every OTA is also sort of distributing their inventory or whatever they've been aggregating into, try to, and the reason for this is because obviously that's sort of helping them to get a better ROI on the investment that they are making in terms of aggregating that whole demand in there.
Right.
Yeah.
So conclude, hotel distribution is work in progress. And if really domestic demand has to increase, then something needs to be done.
Yeah, it is a work in progress. But the good thing is, as I said, the new technologies which are emerging, and that's, I think, one area in the travel where the blockchain can be used in terms of how quickly you get those sort of, the number of properties very fast into the platform. And also, sir, I think one unfortunate thing with the hotel has been there's been a no umbrella body like the IATA was there with the air has emerged for hotels, right? Because that not only sort of helps to put certain frameworks on that, but also in terms of assures, in terms of the certain commercial, how commercially thing works between the distributor and the platform as well. So yeah, it is a work in progress. Yeah.
Okay. So coming back to ClearTrip, I mean, we claim to be number one player in the Middle East, number two player in India, and obviously Africa being the next phase of growth. And these are multiple countries, obviously, multiple languages, right? And if you look at India, it's also multiple countries, at least multiple languages, right? So what are the learnings of ClearTrip and you personally from this market, which you can bring to India or vice versa, which can help Indian demand or direction be better going forward in the times we are in today?
No, definitely. I think there are a couple of things which I think obviously, one is that that the COVID is going to change, 19 is going to change the way travel was distributed and sold, right? And I'm sure the consumption is also going to be changed. This is like one of those, it's going to change the travel. It's going to be one of the monumental changes what 9/11 did to the transportation security, right? And I think COVID will add a sort of another complexity. And I think, and obviously this is not the last of the viruses the world has seen, right? And this is probably one of the many more to come, which eventually means is there's a lot of thought which is going around is in terms of, as we grapple and the policymakers will look into that, how something like that can never put world to the kind of position that we are in, which basically means there will be a process around better data gathering, and also in terms of how do you make sure that the world continues to move on rather than sort of come to a standstill like where we are today, and that will basically mean there's a lot of the new technologies and the existing technologies that we have will emerge. How do we basically make sure merge the data of the health data of the traveler with the sort of PNRs in terms of the and doing that. Now that's more in terms of looking into the future, but if you kind of look at that, we just take a step back. We entered into the Middle East market back in 2011-12. And the idea was born out of the sort of certain small experiment. And that time you used to see a very, very significant traffics on our platforms coming out from the IPs coming out from the Middle East, right? And so we thought, let's obviously, that the reason for this was a large Indian expat population there where the frequency of travel back and forth to India is fairly high. So we sort of, decided to sort of venture out in 2012, 13 as an experiment to sort of set up our ClearTrip in UAE. And then from there on, we sort of moved on to about 9 countries in Middle East. Now, Middle East is it's a lot of people refer it as to one geographic sort of a bundle or an area, but essentially, it's about a 9 or 11, depending upon how you see it, is about 11 countries, right? And which have very, very different consumer behavior, very, very different population mix, but obviously there's one binding thing is the language, right, which is Arabic. Now, obviously, and within that, like for example, if you take the case of UAE roughly has about 9.5 million population, and 92% of that population is in an expat population, very, very sort of comfortable in English. So effectively, you can come into the UAE, do not have a language, the Arabic is a language, and you can continue to operate in, right, and without any issue, right? Whereas you go into the Saudi, which is the largest market, both by population as well as in terms of consumer spending, and the largest economy in the region, with roughly 35 million population. And that's completely in reverse. It's a very large expat population, but expat only make about 20-25% of the overall population. And people local are far more comfortable in Arabic versus English. They're very comfortable in transacting travel in English, but when it comes to the customer support, customer service, they're very, very uncomfortable speaking to somebody in English, but rather they'll be very, very comfortable to speaking in their own language, which basically means that if you do not have an Arabic as a language, then effectively they consider you as an outsider, which they consider you as a company which is only looking after the expat population, or sort of targeting there. So obviously that's and I think when you kind of and similarly sort of you go on there, Egypt again, similar story in there, large population, the largest population in the larger Greater Middle East region, a very, very small expat population. So obviously, these are the sort of countries where the Arabics is a mix. And when we kind of look back in India, even though English is the largest sort of binding for when it comes to sort of travel transaction in India. So if you look at, is there a great demand today that we sort of see in terms of providing the transaction in a vernacular? The answer to that is very limited. Yes, there are going to be limited pockets to that. But yeah, when we look at in terms of, let's look at the air category, right, as a selling, I think there effectively the incremental demand a vernacular will generate isn't going to be very, very significant. But yeah, when you come into the train and the buses, I think there's a massive plus on that needs to be added. But I think the other important thing is which we've been working over the last 18 months or so in terms of how do you basically give the service in the different languages. When we kind of look at today, we have our customer services operated at two different locations, which is Gurgaon and Pune, and we typically among about 250, 280 agents that we have today, they speak in between them about 18 or 19 languages. Right, and there's a small sort of experiment that we have sort of started doing in the last year or so in terms of providing that support in the vernacular. It's not kind of in terms of very instinctively, but in terms of you look at from where the IPs in there, and in case when they call up for the support, in terms of you can give them an option to be served in language, right? So I think, yeah, I mean, this is a great sort of, these are some of the learnings that we've sort of taken in from our operations in Middle East in terms of how do we sort of get to a slightly more making that customer more in ease. But yeah, to answer your question, do we see this as a sort of thing for ClearTrip? I think on the immediate over the next 2 to 3 years horizon, I don't sort of see this in there. But I think, yeah, beyond that, as sort of travel moves more in terms of as generally the economy grows and there's more disposable income towards the greater inward parts of India, you will definitely see about 2 or 3 languages that we would probably like to, and obviously there are pockets in south of India which there are obviously we sort of see that there is a slightly greater spending, disposable income. These are different states in there, and there is definitely a need for that. And but as I said, is that an immediate plan that we have over the next 2 to 3 years? Not at this point of time, but yeah, definitely the focus is in there in terms of how we can sort of serve the customer in their own native language.
Right. So we've addressed two large questions. One is, of course, the hotel challenges and the aggregation of how domestic demand in India could be smoother than what it is today. We have discussed, of course, the verticalization in context to India. Lastly, and of course, $1 billion question is, do you see investments from the Middle East and Africa flowing into India in the travel space? Because we need the money. Everybody needs the money.
Everybody needs the money, and there are as I said, Middle East is a region where this has been there's been a lot of investment which sort of been flowing into different areas. Uh, Unfortunately, we have not seen in the last 3 to 5 years of our being presence in there whether there is a greater appetite for the Middle East money to come into India. Now, the reason for this is the travel in India, especially the online travel in India has been a complete bloodbath when in terms of profitability, and a lot of people, the view the people have is India is a very interesting market. Probably this is one of the obviously the three biggest markets in the long term, and if you kind of look at that comparatively between the three largest market, this is probably the only market which has about high double-digit growth left over the next 20 years, right? And that has to do with in terms of what the shape the economy has to take, the infrastructure. There's a tremendous growth in potential for growth in infrastructure, and related to that, and in terms of that will need require the investment and the demand for the transportation, which is specifically the air transportation. But I think the one thing which is putting a lot of people nervous about investing for travel in India has been the site and profitability, right? And if you kind of look at in the region, right? I mean, outside India, outside China, India has been the market where effectively e-commerce is been there for the longest, right? I mean, today if you look at the three big OTAs, they've been around for about depending upon 18 to 12 years, and none of them have a profitability in sight, right? And so I think that's been a big concern. Now, will COVID change the behavior of the travel sellers, that rather than chasing the market share, which is sort of in a market like India becomes like an endless chase, because there's somebody or the other is always there with lot more bags of dollars than you have been. So I think till the time that part is not addressed, I don't see any sort of an interest in the Middle Eastern money to come into the travel in India. And we had multiple conversations with multiple funds and multiple individual offices, wealthy individual offices in the region. And the single most sort of question that they have is that when do we see the profitability in India?
Right. So the conclusion here would be that if you had a profitable boutique, nicely technology-driven entity in India, perhaps there could still be an interest. But if
no, absolutely, and rather, my view is that I think you will see a far more, reverse investment. So, I mean, whether it's the investment in terms of the know-how, like in terms of we have done from here to the other parts of because we saw a certain opportunity in certain, there's certain pockets. It was the opportunity in certain pockets. There was, the market conditions which were very similar to what would be seen in India. So I'm actually more bullish in terms of the reverse rather than the sort of money coming from the Middle East into India.
I think, Karthik, we are back to you here to summarize it. Karthik?
Yeah. Hi. So we've got a few questions. I'm just going to consolidate it in the interest of time. So broadly, what people are asking, Amit, is that, you have very well articulated in terms of, what is the current situation and what you're planning for. But people are saying that, what do you see that post-COVID, what kind of value differentiators would exist from an OTA perspective? I mean, if we talk about the category of hotels, do you see something like online check-in, check-out on the OTA app or website itself, or dining experiences which can be pre-booked in the OTA app itself? Those kind of new, value differentiators do you see? Because I mean, you can't compete on pricing and other things, as you rightly said. Somebody else would have more money than you. But what kind of product innovation do you see could happen? Maybe in terms of customer experience, customer handling, more in-depth sort of frills and fancies which can be offered, like a travel buddy experience. Are you already working on some of those value differentiators in the post-COVID environment?
Sure. No, I think one thing which is obviously the COVID is going to change is I think there's going to be a whole lot focus on efficiencies, and some of these efficiencies will result in terms of how does these efficiencies not only lead to cost reduction but also in terms of better experience, which basically means the better leverage of technology to deliver that. And some of these things have been easy, but it's just been when you are in the treadmill, there are you have to worry about a lot of other things, and these things which are very incremental are kind of sort of get pushed to the back of the sort of priorities in there. I think this is probably the time that all of the us whether the travel sellers or even these travel service providers, they are thinking in terms of how do we sort of, when we get out of this, we are able to serve our customer better, and and also being more efficiently. And I think some of these things become, these are not only a clear value add or differentiator in terms of the consumer, but also in terms of the efficiencies, right? These are very, very big plus, right? And that's kind of, from a look at this small example for that, from a travel seller perspective, it's sort of, gives them, if you have these things, you don't have to worry about consumer has to sort of calling you whether my booking is confirmed or not confirmed. So all the anxiety is being taken off from a hotel perspective. It gives them a far more sort of, I don't need to go up, follow up whether the booking is confirmed, not confirmed there. I know exactly what time the guy is going to come in. I can sort of organize for a smaller hotel, I can organize, my presence at the desk, the front desk and appropriately and all that. So I think these are the sort of things that you will sort of see that these are the pluses which will emerge out of these COVID, and a lot of these things which were always there, but they were sort of all coming incrementally, and you will sort of see that a lot of these things will happen, and both on the air side as well as on the hotel side. Yeah.
Okay. So, Ashish, any final comments before we conclude?
No, Amit, I look forward to having you the real coffee when you come to Gurgaon next time.
Yeah, definitely. I think we all are looking forward to sort of, now, I think the
really meeting up.
But I think this is getting a little bit overboard now.
Right. Well, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you very much. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Amit. Thanks, everyone. And we will see you on Wednesday, same time, with Ritu Mehrotra of Booking.com. Till then, stay safe, stay at home. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.